My name is Alex Radcliffe. I'm 33 years old, born in Toronto, Ontario, and currently living in Cleveland, Ohio. This is Board Game Tag. Thanks to Jenna from Board Game Garden for picking me to go ahead and continue this little game. It's been going around a bit. Basically a bunch of people, content creators, going through just a variety of questions and just, answering them, I guess. Going through them, covering the questions. What's your first game? What are your other hobbies? What's your favorite player count? We'll go through all of those. I'll timestamp all the questions in case you want to jump into it. And then, of course, at the end, I'll nominate 3 people who I'll have to separately harass so I don't look terrible for nominating them. But let's go ahead and dive into this. Starting off with the first question, name, age, and location. We just did that one. I'm Alex Radcliffe. Alexander Sender Radcliffe is my full name, by the way. You may have heard anything from Alexander Sender Radcliffe III to Alexander Sender Radcliffe III from North Undershire, first of his name, last of his kin, or just Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. There's any number of different ways to go by it, but strictly speaking, my name is Alexander Sender Radcliffe. Fun fact, by the way, Alexander and Sender are actually double names. Sender is the Yiddish nickname for Alexander that at one point became a double name. This is not the most uncommon concept when you have Yiddish names attached to Jewish names. There's many other concepts like Dov Bear, which is the Hebrew name for a bear, followed by the Yiddish name for a bear, or Aryeh Leib, a lion and a lion. It's a fairly similar concept where you have these double names in different languages. And for me, Alexander, from Alexander the Great originally, followed by Sender, which was the Yiddish version of it. And my full name is Alexander Sender Radcliffe, not the third. Radcliffe's just my father's name. 33 years old and born in Toronto, Ontario in Canada, and currently in Cleveland, Ohio with my wife, 4 kids, and no pets. So I guess that was a longer answer than necessary for that one. We'll go through these in general, all of these. Number 2, favorite childhood board game. I'm going to have to go with Risk 2210 for this one. Risk 2210, which is the best version of Risk, bar none. I say that with the knowledge that I've played like 4 versions of Risk, and there's like 1,700. So the best version of Risk, bar none. Risk 2210, highly recommended. I think it would still hold up today. Not in comparison to some of the more area control, dudes in a map games that I currently play, but I think it would still be a fun game. I have fond memories of, we found that game, I don't even remember who found it, someone in our house found it as a kid, as we were kids or whatnot, and it came home and it became one of our go-tos for a long time. The game we played over holidays or when we just had people around just for 4 or 5 hours of Risk, of going for the moon, of leveling up your commanders, of, well, having commanders, not so much leveling them up. It was a fun version of Risk. Buying power cards, oh my gosh, it really held. It really held its own, and it's one that I have fond memories of, and I'm scared to play it again because I think it'll tarnish its memory. But Risk 2210 was easily my favorite game when I was a kid, and it's a game that I did pick up when I started getting back into board games as an adult, but I never played it as an adult, and I'm still scared to dive back into it. When did you really get into the board game hobby? Well, really is always that interesting question, but I think generally it refers to when did you transition from playing games, whatever that means, playing games at however many points in your life, versus when you suddenly fell down the rabbit hole of what are all these things and where are they, where do I get more of them and all that stuff. And I want to say 2011, 2012 is when I fell into the hobby. I've gone back and forth with both those dates. If you've heard me say one on camera than the other, it's because it was somewhere around then. I don't remember exactly when. I didn't, chronicle each single date. Late 2011, early 2012, somewhere in that range is when I fell into the board game hobby. As far as the first game I purchased and do I still own that game, which would be the next question, the first game I purchased is a loose one because the first game I purchased is really like 13 games. Once I fell into the hobby, once I found all these games, I did go on a bit of a buying spree at one point. More specifically, shortly after finding out all these games, we won a PS3 in a local auction. PS3, this should date how old this conversation is. And we didn't need a PS3 because my wife wasn't playing video games and I played computer games. And so I didn't really need a PS3. And so I sold it on eBay, got around $270 for it at the time, and turned that $270 directly into board games. Went shopping at a few stores, I believe it was Miniature Market, Cool Stuff Inc., and an eBay purchase. 3 separate purchases, bought roughly 13 different games in that first purchase, and I have 2 left from those original 13. Just 2. 7 Wonders and Castles of Burgundy are the 2 that have survived. I've gone into in other videos some of the other games and what happened or what not, and some of them I never even got played in the initial batch because we didn't have the right player counts. Longer story, I believe like Dungeon Run and Guillotine and Jambo and a whole bunch of other games in those initial purchases. But 7 Wonders and Castles of Burgundy. Technically Jambo. Technically I have Jambo back. I've actually gotten Jambo back since the last time I did this conversation. So if you really want to argue it, it's 7 Wonders, Castles of Burgundy, and Jambo. And technically none of them are in the original version because Castles of Burgundy and 7 Wonders I've upgraded to the newer editions of those games. But that would be the games I still have from the initial purchase. Do I have any hobbies other than board games? Well, yes, none that I'm into as board games. Something that I don't often talk about, but I've talked about in these historical videos or whatnot in the past, is the fact that I, for a long time, went through a period of jumping around from hobby to hobby. And hobby to hobby is a loose term. Sometimes it means a specific video game. Like, for the longest time, I played Guild Wars, not Guild Wars 2, Guild Wars. I loved the original Guild Wars, deeply into that. A whole bunch of things, which we'll get to in a second, but for a long time, I jumped around. I would have a hobby for 2 years, something I really focused a lot of my energy and time into. And those things always last for relatively small amounts of time. It relatively means it could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 3 months. But board games is the hobby that has lasted the longest for me. Board games is something I've been into since 2011. That's going to be 11 years of being into this hobby in a way that I've never held that passion alive for any other hobby quite as long. And I attribute that to a large extent to the variety of the board game hobby. It doesn't feel like I'm into one thing. It feels like I'm into all these things that keep evolving and changing. But I'm sidetracked from the question here. The question is other hobbies that I have. And to that end, I'll just jump around a bit over here. I love reading. Huge fan of reading. For a long time when I was juggling a job and content creation, I didn't really read anything. I think I read one book in a 2-year period, which is a shame for me. And for context, in the past 2 months since I've quit my job, I've read 8 or 9 books. And so I've always enjoyed reading. It's just an issue of trying to juggle too many things, put it on the back burner for a bit. But I love reading, and I've actively been enjoying diving back into it. Past that, a bunch of things that I do or don't do in various degrees. Painting miniatures. Well, I started getting into that shortly before I did content creation, and really enjoyed the process, got some paints. I painted a little when I was younger, Warhammer armies, and so I do enjoy painting miniatures, and well, I started getting into it before content creation. I hope to dive back into it. I still have all my paint sets. When do I dive back into it? One thing at a time. Everything, since I've gone full-time in content creation, it's been a balance of adding new things that I'm doing, as well as trying to slowly incorporate old things back in. I hope to get back into painting at some point. Speaking of painting, I also draw, which is, I guess, adjacent to painting. Now, when I say I also draw, I haven't drawn something in, like, 7 years. But I actually draw really well. If I remember, I'll throw a little thing up on the screen over here. I do draw really well. Really well is obviously comparative, so I'm not going to like say whatever. But I draw better than you'd think when someone just says, hey, I draw. It's a skill I learned when I was flying on a plane to Israel in 2005, something like that, 2005. And I knew I was going to be on an 11-hour flight, and I was like, well, I want to figure out something. So I brought a book with me, brought some painting supplies, drawing supplies, and learned to draw, and then spent the next year getting better at that hobby. And I really love the end product. The problem is it takes me like 6 to 7 hours to draw a photo, and practically speaking, that's not the kind of window of time I have anymore in my life, or not without giving something else up. So I love drawing. I'd love the opportunity to dive back into it at some point, but as with most things in life, there's lots of things I love, and I just have to pick and choose what I do. I also juggle, for that matter. Probably should have bought some juggling something for this particular segment, but I do know how to juggle. I can, again, juggle fairly decently, both, regular, just juggling, as well as tricks. If you know Mills Mess or Mel's Mess, I think it's called Mills Mess. Mills Mess is a very fancy little juggling technique where your arms are crossing as you juggle. It looks very cool. Probably should have bought some juggling supplies to this video. I'm looking if I have anything I could juggle, but nothing that I can juggle well enough that it would look impressive. You have to have like the right equipment to do it well. But juggling, got into that. I was also into, I don't juggle actively, but I know how to juggle still. It's not something you drop quite as well. Not something you drop. Also was into Magic for a long time. Magic, Magic like Magic Tricks, not MTG, the card game. Really enjoyed Magic. Did that for a few years, until I eventually lost like $800 worth of Magic stuff. I had like a collection of like around $1,100, which when you're 14 is basically your life savings. And then I lost around $800 of it on a bus, and lost my interest in rebuilding that collection. So I still know how to do Magic. I still could do various tricks and stuff like that. Anything like the casual little like party trick. What? Like just wow. Or just like, fun things, just as, again, probably should have come prepared. Let me do this over here. Let me just grab one of these, because I have this. This I can at least do somewhat. But just any number of different things. Just taking this little over here and just nothing. Let's ignore that. But there's lots of things you can do with Magic. Or this one over here. This one I like as well, which is, just any number of different things you can do with Magic. But more impressive stuff when you actually give me actual things I have. And I still do have props around the house and things, but again, not actively into it. I was also into Magic, like Magic the Gathering, not Magic Tricks. Magic the Gathering is a hobby I had for a very long time. Very much enjoyed it, heavily dove into it for probably around 3 years of my life, maybe, and then transitioned that into board games at a certain point. I like video games of all kinds to a certain degree. I don't play them as much as I used to, but big fan of Hearthstone and Slay the Spire. I was heavily into Overwatch for like 2 years straight. Of just heavily committed. I'm sure I'll dive back into it when Overwatch 2 comes out. But I think that covers most of the stuff that I've been into. a bunch of stuff, basically. I have a variety of interests, just none of them really compared to board games, which is why I'm here talking to you on a board game channel, but all the other things that I don't actively do quite as much. Next up from there, as far as next question, we have our breakthrough game. What is your breakthrough game? For me, it's going to be Stone Age. And I'm assuming this question is, what's the game that brought you into the hobby? That's the way I took this one, which is, for me, it's Stone Age. Specifically, I had played Small World a few months earlier. This is back in 2011, 2012, when I first got into the hobby, when I first dove into this aspect of the hobby. I played Small World. From my brother-in-law, brought it back from college to play with us, my wife and I, and we played it. I really enjoyed it. And then like 3 months later, he brought home Stone Age. And I was like, wait a second. You just introduced me to 2 games. One's like fine. I get one. Like, sure, there's a game I haven't heard of. But now there's 2 really good games that I've never heard of before and didn't know these things existed. And that started me down the rabbit hole. So it's really the 1-2 punch of Small World followed by Stone Age. I had played Catan. I had played Carcassonne. I had played games like Corridor or, I don't know, other games that are okay. Quelf I played. It's not really it's more of a party game. But I played a bunch of games to a degree. But that 1-2 punch of Small World followed by Stone Age is what drove me down the rabbit hole of this board game hobby. A theme that always draws me in. What theme always draws me in? This is one of the harder questions to answer because I don't know if I have an always draws me in question. I'm a sucker for some of the classic themes, medieval stuff, not really zombies so much, you know, dry old white dudes on a cover with a bunch of Euro mechanics. That sometimes works for me, but not because of the theme, more because I just know what game is underneath it. Woodland critters, maybe. Woodland critters are adorable, like many games, Everdell, Root, what's the other game, that little stall game? I can't remember, but if you show me a bunch of woodland critters and some cute artwork, that's definitely going to do a lot for me off the bat. Is there a theme that always draws me in? I don't know. Woodland critters is probably as close as we get. And what's my favorite board game mechanic? Well, this one's significantly easier because the answer is drafting. There are many board game mechanics that I really enjoy. Deck building would be a classic for me. Worker placement's always enjoyable. Area control, dudes on a map, all of those are phenomenal. But a mechanic that will always have me interested in your game no matter what happens, although I'm not saying I'll like your game, I'll just be interested in your game, is drafting. I love the tension that comes from a good card draft. The tension that comes from not just choosing for myself what I want, but being mindful of the fact that I'm about to pass on to you something else. All the stuff I said no to is something you can say yes to and might come back to bite me later. I love that in a game. I love that tension, that twofold tension of not just about me, but about you as well. As far as a mechanic that I don't like, or that I'm not good at, cascading failure is the mechanic I usually go to as the one that I really strongly dislike. Cascading failure is the idea that when you fail, things get worse. Now, it doesn't just mean you failed. When you fail, you fail. Okay, great, no problem. It doesn't just mean you're facing off against a zombie in a crowded alley and you fail your attack roll and now the zombie's alive, so things get worse. No. Cascading failure is the idea that as you fail, your stats get worse too. Your chances of success get worse. As you get hit by the enemy, you now roll worse dice and suddenly you're at a disadvantage even further. The idea that as something fails, it cascades into the next failure, which cascades into the next failure. The most basic idea I can tell you is let's pretend that when you attack, you need a 3+. But if you miss, then on your next attack you need a 4+. And if you miss on your next attack, you need a 5+. And if you miss on your next attack, you need a 6+. That's the idea that as things go poorly, they get worse and worse statistically for the next roll. I tend not to like that because those games I find can result in large degrees of swinginess. You can have games that go really, really, really well because you didn't fail at all and you never hit that cascading momentum, but you can also have games that a single failure point cascades into the next failure point, and at that point you're snowballing, and it's a horrifically challenging, hard game. I have had too many bad experiences with cascading failure that when I hear that as a mechanic, I'm not saying I won't like your game, I am saying that I'm instantly on guard about your game. As far as the newest game in my collection, what's the newest game in my collection? Have I played it or them? A few over here, and I'll say I sort of played it or them. We have Stars of Icarios, Endless Winter, and Snapships are going to be the newest games that showed up for me. Possibly something showed up more recently, but I think those are the 3 most recent ones. Stars of Icarios I have played. I've played it 3 times already. I dove into it very quickly as soon as it showed up. That was actually because a viewer stopped by and taught me the game, which was well timed because my copy showed up after he had already planned. He's like, I'm coming this day and we're going to play Stars of Icarios. And then when he said that, then the next day my copy came, and the next day he came up and showed me how to play. So that was very helpful. Endless Winter also showed up. I haven't played the copy that showed up, but I have played it in the past as well as recently on a Twitch stream as well, so I've dove into this winter, but not the copy that just showed up. I hope to dive into that soon. And then Snapships. Snapships I've semi-played, because Snapships is a twofold. It's an upcoming Kickstarter, and it's one, or by the time you're watching this, maybe an active Kickstarter, I guess. But Snapships is both a toy and a game. I've already encountered and engaged with the toy part. Now I just need to sit down and play the game part, which is the second step of it. It's kind of like, think like an X-Wing kind of in-space kind of situation where you're just fighting against each other in space, having fun, while also being a toy that myself and my kids have been having a lot of fun with today. So the toy factor, already dove into. The playing the game part, that should be happening in a day or two. As far as my favorite player count is going to be 4. I don't know, maybe 3 and 4. Let's go with 3 and 4. The reason I went to 4, I think, is because I think 3 for me happens more often, and so I think of 4 as my favorite player count because there's a bunch of games that I really, really like playing when we have 4. Now, there's a bunch of games I really like playing when we have 3 too, but those actually get played more, so I have less of a longing for it. So 3 and 4 really give me the good experience where at 2 players you lose some of that social interaction. 2 players is great. All the games I play with my wife are 2-player games. Well, she plays 3 and 4-player games too, but a lot of my 2-player games are going to be with my daughter, with my wife, and just I really enjoy those experiences. But there's something fun about the extra element that a 3rd or 4th player adds, that social degree, and a 5th player is good, and there's some great games you can play at 5, but the count starts going down at that point, and the downtime starts going up, and you start needing to be more selective with the games you can play. So I'm going to say 3 and 4 are my favorite player count. The next question is, what is your board game pet peeve? I mean, I think there are going to be classic board game pet peeves, classic ones. The most basic one, which is not my choice, is going to be food. You know, if you're sitting there with your... Cheetos are an overused example, but if you're sitting there just eating regular chips and then touching my cards and not being mindful of it, I'm like, please don't. Please don't. If you're going to be eating chips at the table while we play a board game, and I'm fine with that, just one hand's the chip hand and one hand's the component hand, and you don't touch the component with your chip hand until you wash your hand, because please don't. Please don't. It's probably more neurotic than it needs to be, but I don't love food around games. But for me, the one that really gets to me, the one that's far more frequent, because we're usually pretty good about not having the food with the games, is people bending cards when they hold them. Where you have a hand of cards, and I find gamers do this too, like real hardcore gamers who love board games, who have 17 million games of their own. I find they do it so often, where they're holding a hand of cards, but the way they hold them is like bending the cards. They're curving them towards them with a little bit more of a gusto than like a straight fan. So they're adding a curve to the card as they hold their cards, and I feel like the jerk at the table who's like, I know you own 1,700 games, but could you not be a jerk with my games? Could you not destroy them with your touchy hands as you bend the cards? I think that's the one that really gets to me. Because I'm always mindful. I'm like, okay, how much bend is enough before I say something? What level am I the jerk at? Like, you know, a slight curve, probably fine. You're not bending them. A little harder curve, like... It's always interesting applying your own biases and your own things that bother you to other people at the table, and bending cards for me is likely my pet peeve as far as that goes. As far as what player color do you play the most often, it's a kind of a weird answer here. I'm going to say none but red. None but red is my option. And what I mean by that is that I don't have a player color I play most often in and of itself. Meaning I'll play whatever color I'm assigned, and it doesn't really matter to me in the slightest. I don't have a preference for or against any color whatsoever, I think. But what does happen is we have one player in my game group who likes playing blue. We have one player in my game group who likes playing yellow. We have another player who likes playing orange, especially if yellow's already taken. We have another player who likes playing green. And so from those primary dominant colors, the one that is not selected by any other person is red. So I likely end up playing red the most often just because of the nature of the primary colors that show up in a game, and the fact that the other primary colors all get selected by other players, not all, gets selected by other people depending on who's playing. So I might end up with yellow if the yellow person's not there that night. I might end up with green if the green person's not there that night. But statistically speaking, because those things are present, I think I probably play red the most, just by default. As far as reading the rulebooks or watching a how to play video, which do I prefer? Do I prefer to read a rulebook or watch a how to play video? I'm going to say rules every single time, with the caveat that it's 99% of the time. For me, reading a rulebook is go-to. I will watch a video to learn to play a game, usually when I'm under pressure. I find that watching from a video, if you pop on Rodney Smith, Paul Grogan, if you pop them on a 2x speed, stick your face to the camera, the screen, stick your face to the screen, do not take your eyes off at all and just focus intensely for like the 12 minutes it takes to go through a 24-minute video on 2x speed. I find that does a good job of getting me up to go. I'm like just intensely staring, process, okay, good, setup, okay, fine, okay, cool, draft 2 card, pass 1, okay, great, then the place the worker, and not if, okay, great, okay, fine, cool, and then you take that, and then the comment starts, and then you go ahead. I find that works fairly well for me if I'm under pressure. But it's not my go-to way to learn a game. That's just if I really need to learn it quickly, and it's the fastest way to process. I have the visuals, I have the information. I like having information come at me quickly when I'm being taught a game. But again, not my favorite way. My favorite way is reading the rules myself. Sitting down with a cup of coffee, reading the rules, processing, looking at things. On some games, setting up the game as I learn it as well. That can really help me as well. But I find it is the slower way compared to processing a video on 2x speed. But I find that I get all the information. Whenever I watch a video, there's things that I miss. There's details that can slip me by. And so I find my personal preference is reading the rules. Plus, if I want to reference something, I've read the rules. I'm like, oh yeah, that's in section over here. I know where to go when I have a question, as opposed to when I watch a rules video and I have a question, I find I'm flipping through the rulebook for the first time. So read the rulebook's my preference, but not the only way that I learn to play a game. From there, favorite snacks to eat while playing board games. So favorite snacks to eat while playing board games. You can get my sense of this one as we just talked about, the chips aspect. I'm not a huge fan of snacks around board games in general. What I am okay with is food that is less crummy or greasy or touching your fingers. So finger food is off the table inherently. And to that end, my favorite food that I have while playing board games is likely something called kugel. Kugel, that's K-U-G-E-L, very traditional Jewish food, and potato kugel would be the default one you go to in this case. But having an overnight potato kugel, and again, if you're Jewish, if you're religious, Orthodox, and you know what this is, it's delicious. But if you don't, I'll explain in a second, and it's still delicious, you just don't know it yet. But having an overnight potato kugel, which is often just taking a potato kugel and either putting it in the oven or crock pot overnight, so it really that gets those flavors, the juices, and all that, and then serving it the next day while having a board game. Don't do it often, but when I do, it's eaten out of a bowl or plate or something with a utensil, so there's no finger food aspect, and it's such a comfort food. It's so delicious, and what it is effectively the closest comparison I can give, although it's a terrible comparison. It's effectively like a potato casserole, sort of. It's shredded potato. That's what it is. It's shredded potato, and the way you shred it can differ from person to person of how you prepare it. You can put it in a Cuisinart, you can grate it, you can do a whole bunch of options, but it's shredded potato along with like some salt, some eggs, baked together. Might be some other ingredients. I haven't made a kugel in a long time, but baked together in baked. Is it baked? I want to say it's baked, cooked. It's put in the oven in some way, shape, or form. And then that's what you have. You just have that. It's delicious if done right. It is tolerable if done poorly. But it's a really strong Jewish comfort food. Very traditional Jewish comfort food. And I like having that when playing board games, although I don't do it frequently. Have I ever been to a board game convention? If so, which ones? Well, I've been to a bunch by now. I've been to Origins twice. I've been to PAX once. Gamma once. Okay, fine, that's where we are. That's where we cap out. I will be going to Gen Con very shortly, in a month or two. I will hopefully be going to WSBG, the World Series of Board Gaming. I'm going to the World Series of Board Gaming. I will hopefully be going to PAX Unplugged again, possibly PAX East, a bunch of various things out there. I want to go to Dice Tower West at some point to get a nice board game convention of playing games in. Probably go to BGG Con at some point, but as far as the answers right now, it's going to be Origins twice, PAX once, PAX Unplugged once, and Gamma once is so far the board game conventions I've gone to. Really enjoyed them. Looking forward to going to more. I have a lot of fun, and every single time I have more fun than the last. They build upon each other, I find, at least for myself. Just meeting new people and then meeting those people again and remembering the places you went, and that's a good place to get a coffee, and that's a good place to hang out over there, and this is the room where we can play games here. You learn information that makes it useful, and I enjoy that aspect of it. As far as an unreleased game I'm most looking forward to playing, probably Unconscious Mind, although I might be biased in that answer because inherently some of these questions are just based on whatever most recent thing is going through my head, and with Endless Winter just arriving, and I just unboxed that on my channel, and I hope to be diving into it shortly, well, I'm now very conscious of Unconscious Mind. I'm very aware of it presently, and I'm like, I want to play Unconscious Mind. Are there others? Yeah, there definitely are. Just the one I'm most conscious of currently is Unconscious Mind, and so I'm going to go with that as the board game that is not released that I'm looking forward to. As far as what's my favorite thing about the board game hobby, well, I touched upon this a bit a second ago, but the people. The way I talk about conventions and the fact that whenever I go to conventions, I meet new people and I meet them again and I enjoy their company again the next time, and I get to say, oh, hey, how are you doing? I haven't seen you since Gen Con, or I haven't seen you since this, or what's been going on, and just these weird little mini family gatherings that you have at conventions with people who keep going to conventions. And then not just conventions, but also just the people in the hobby in general. Whether it's my friends who are part of my game group, and those friendships, and it's a weird thing to say, but the friendships I have with the people in my game group are stronger than the friendships I have with the people who aren't. Because the practical reality is, I have a lot of people who I'm really, really close friends with, but if I see you every 2 or 3 months versus if I see you every single week, inherently there's a stronger relationship to the ones I see every single week, because I like both of them, but I'm talking to this one a lot more. Whether it's the content creator friends I make who I've hung out with or interacted with in any way, shape, or form, I like the people. The hobby, the board games themselves are a big part of everything. I love board games, make no mistake, but it's weird because, like, I love board games, I really do. But relationships are such a huge thing to me. And for me, one of the things I really enjoy, and I said this in a recent video, a different video, nothing to do with this one, is one of the few things that I like more than playing board games is having late night conversations about anything with my friends. Like just being up, we finish our board game, it's 11 o'clock at night, it's 12 o'clock at night, whatever it is, and suddenly before you know it, it's 4 a.m. and we've spent the past 4 hours talking about whatever. And it happens more than you think, at least for myself. It's something I really enjoy. Yes, we just had fun playing whatever, but we then spent the next few hours bonding and learning and having a conversation around different things, and I really, really enjoy that. And so I want to say that the social connections that the board game hobby has built, developed, and helped me with over the years helped solidify, just through the nature of keeping people in touch in different ways. That's easily my favorite thing about the hobby. Yeah, people. And then lastly, and speaking of people who I can now harass with this video, speaking of which, the last question is, who else would I like to see do this challenge or tag or not? Who else do I want to see answer a whole bunch of questions about themselves, what they like, player counts, preferences, hobbies, just to learn more about them? For me, I'm going to go with 3 people. I'm going to recommend 3 people, and I'm going to have to send them this video and harass all of them. And I'm specifically choosing 3 people that I'm comfortable harassing because it's just more fun that way. But I'm going to go with Devin Talks Tabletop. Devin Talks Tabletop, that's going to be Devin. Devin, Devin Norris from Devin Talks Tabletop. I've talked about it in the past. He'd be good at rambling around this. We have Chris George from Room and Board, who's also be good at rambling around this. I've started calling Chris second Devin, but Chris has got his own personality too, sometimes, on a good day. And then lastly, we have Professor Meg. Professor Meg Professor Meg, I guess. I'm going to nominate her as well, and then I'm going to harass the 3 of these people to go ahead and do this Tabletop Tag challenge. And with that, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this, learned a little something about me or whatnot, and until next time, have a good one.